probably the single best thing that we can do is store more water when we have it. I mean, some years we have enough water. Many years we don't have enough water. And so the challenge is to take those few years when we do have excess water and find ways to store it. And it's becoming a little more accepted that the best way to store water is to store it underground, is to turn it into groundwater. That way it cannot evaporate. You put water in a huge surface reservoir and you lose up to 40% of it to the sun. So storing it underground, but storing it underground there's physical challenges. You have to find the right kind of soil that can accommodate water. And there's also the challenges of getting it into the ground. You have to get the water, use fancy injection wells to do that. But there's also legal barriers, and that's probably the bigger problem right now, is that you just can't take excess water in a river and put it underground for storage. The state's laws, interestingly enough, say you cannot just take water and store it. You have to take water, you have to use it for something. We call that beneficial use. And frankly, the state really needs to make some changes in its water rights laws to make it easier from a legal point of view for us to store our water underground. That would be a huge, huge help.
So is it illegal to store water underground if you are a farmer and you put the water in, or if you're trying to store the water underground?
It's confusing because these are the questions that are now being asked, and it seems to me there's not a lot of legal clarity to it. But a couple of years ago, when we had a really huge snowpack and a lot of excess water in the state, there was a lot of concern that it was illegal to take those excess waters and put it underground. The governor actually had to issue a special proclamation waiving these legal restrictions, which you could only do on a temporary basis. But basically what he was waiving is the legal requirement that if you take water, you have to do something with the water, use it beneficially, which means you can't store the water, because that under the old law, that's considered water hoarding. The governor was able to temporarily suspend that so water could be stored, but the temporary measure is not what we need. We need the legislature to actually change the law to make it clearly legal for farmers to store that water.
And do you think this storing water underground needs to be done by farmers, or do you think there needs to be other projects that actually make these in a larger scale for the state?
Oh, it's not just farmers. Farmers certainly, but it also needs to be done a lot by cities that can do it, really need to be doing it. And the state is also full of these little government agencies that we call irrigation districts and water districts, which traditionally they exist to build irrigation infrastructure to help deliver water to farmers. And we have hundreds of them in the state. They should all be clearly empowered to be able to grab excess water, including flood water, and store it underground. That's something we really need the legislature to do.
Are there any other ideas to help with this situation?
Water recycling is something the state needs to give a larger priority to. We are getting better at it, but we could learn a lot from a city like Las Vegas. I've heard it said that Las Vegas recycles up to 90% of the water that the city uses. And Las Vegas is a city that, is less rainfall than any other city in the United States. And yet it has to support this, vast hotel infrastructure with tons of water requirements. They are good at water recycling. We could learn something from them. And, there's also, desalination. There's a lot of water there, in the ocean. There's certain problems with that. Building a water desalination plant is a big, expensive capital project. But more importantly, it takes quite a bit of energy to run a desalination plant. And then you also have the problem of when you take ocean water and desalinate it, you get fresh water, but then you also get a really, really highly salty brine water. What do we do with it? And initially the idea is throw it back in the ocean. Well, that the environmental laws probably won't allow that because it could be damaging actually to the ocean. So we need to do something with the brine water. So these kinds of problems need to be solved before we can really expand in desalination. But a combination of all of these things, more water storage, better water recycling, finding ways to do desalination, these are probably the things that are going to make California more water resilient. And just on top of that, probably some smarter uses of water by people, because most water wasted in the state is usually wasted in the home. Running sprinklers when perhaps we shouldn't, drippy faucets, bad toilet flappers, huge amounts of water are lost from those things.
Tom, what about solving this issue in the Delta? Is it possible to get all these stakeholders in a room and have a discussion? And has this been done before?
Oh, it's been done several times with mixed results, I think it's fair to say. In the 1990s, there was a piece of legislation passed. It was called the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, which mandated that state government, federal government, their relative agencies, and then stakeholder groups, environmentalists, cities, farmers, that they all kind of needed to work holistically to solve problems. A big effort was made, and after about 10 years, that kind of collapsed and led to a huge number of lawsuits, just waves and waves of lawsuits. A lot of people seem to be starting to exhaust themselves in the lawsuits, and now there's more interest, it seems to me, on cooperation again. And there's been some surprisingly good efforts at cooperation here in the San Joaquin Valley. Farmers and environmentalists actually finding ways to sit down and talk to each other and even start working out some potential solutions. I mean, they suspect they've got a ways to go, but we've got to make a start, and I think we have made a start.